Once upon a bedtime story. The nightly routine was exhausting but never dull. Lenny, who had shortened her own name from Lenora, stood bargaining with her grandmother once again. The weekends were always a combination of overactive days, followed by the refusal to just fall asleep at night. Lenny would normally ask for a glass of milk or a treat in exchange for just going to bed. Most weekends would end with a short standoff, but when Gasha, Lenny's grandmother, visited, she knew she could up the stakes and get a better deal. Nobody told better bedtime stories than Gasha, and from the day Lenny struggled to say Grandma Tasha and decided Gasha was close enough, she learned that refusing to go to sleep would always end with her Gasha telling her a great bedtime story about the days before the new beginning. This weekend was no different. By the time Lenny had surrendered to her bedtime, she had secured another promise of a great story from Gasha. She put her foot on the hand-carved bed frame that her father had spent weeks building for her and slid under the quilt that Gasha had carefully sewed together herself as a gift for her 5th birthday just 3 months earlier. It was no secret that Lenny was treated like royalty by her father, and even her mother felt the need to remind him that he was spoiling her from time to time. Despite all the fuss, Lenny knew there were limits to the special treatment she could squeeze out of everyone around her. She was a happy child, and most days she knew where the line was and not to cross it. As Gasha lit 2 small candles on the shelf near Lenny's bed, she said,
"Don't forget our deal, little princess. 1 story and then you go to sleep. No fussing or new deals when it's over."
"I promise, Gasha, but no short stories. It has to be a real story,"
reminded Lenny as she recalled a few times when Gasha was looking for a quick way to get her to fall asleep.
"We will see. Stories have a life of their own, Lenny. I just tell them, but how long or short they are is not up to me."
"But you get to pick them, so pick one that is long." "What if I pick the story this time, Gasha?"
Gasha agreed, knowing she couldn't resist the look of excitement on Lenny's face. She straightened the blanket over Lenny's feet and handed her a hand-sewn doll that was little more than a stuffed pillow, shaped like a gingerbread girl and had buttons sewn on for eyes. Supplies were hard to come by, but Lenny didn't know that and thought of her doll as her most prized possession each night before bed and wouldn't fall asleep without it.
"Gasha, tell me why everyone as old as you have a picture on their face,"
said Lenny, pointing to Gasha's eye.
"What do the little lines mean?"
"That's a long story, Lenny. It would take a while to tell that one. Maybe you can pick another story."
"Gasha, you promised."
Gasha studied Lenny's face for a moment and decided it was as good a time as any to tell her this story. As she smiled and surrendered herself to the task, she said,
"I may need my cushion for this one."
Lenny's mother, Dita, who had been standing in the doorway to make sure Lenny didn't create too many demands on Gasha, said, "Mom, are you sure you want to do this? This is a very long story, and if you start, I'm warning you, she will not fall asleep until she knows every detail." Gasha looked at Lenny and said,
"Let's make this deal. I will tell you this story until I get tired, and if I can't finish, I will tell you the rest tomorrow night before bed. Deal?"
"Deal?"
exclaimed Lenny, knowing this was going to be a long story and she loved story time.
"Data, do you mind getting my seat cushion and my blanket? It looks like I'm going to get to spend some time in this chair."
Dita rolled her eyes and smiled at her mom, knowing Lenny had everyone, including Gasha, wrapped around her finger. "I'll be right back, Mom. Might as well get started." Gasha picked up a half-green apple sitting on the little shelf next to Lenny's bed and studied it. The look in her eye made it clear that she was going back in her mind to a real place that she had been to many times. Lenny pulled the doll close. She turned to her side to watch Gasha's expressions as she told her story. Anyone looking on would have known right away that whatever came out of Gasha's mouth, Lenny was going to be hanging on every syllable.
"Once upon a time, many years ago, a warm gust of wind rushed over the barren ground as it carried a cloud of dust into the streets of the crowded market," began Gasha. "A mix of trinkets found among the ruins of what was once a glorious montage of life and prosperity littered the small tables. Loaves of freshly baked bread, figs, pomegranate, olives, and prickly pear cactus lined the food carts as people scrambled to grab them while they lasted. The brutal heat and scarce rain showers made it difficult to grow many of the fruits and vegetables that were once plentiful and often overlooked. In a post-apocalyptic world, a garden of vegetables was a dangerous thing to have, and those who did kept the location a secret as they eked out a meagre living by selling the fruit from the plants. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the patrons clambering for the daily meal items was a thin girl with beautiful green eyes and messy blonde locks that came down past her shoulders. She wore sand-coloured pants and a vest with a backpack filled with what must have been everything she owned. The marketers all knew her as Blink because she was no sooner in one place when she would vanish and be somewhere else each day. She made her way around the walls of the capital city, bringing food to those who were too weak to withstand the challenge of the marketplace, where fights over a food item or arguments with other patrons were commonplace. Blink stood out from all the other residences of the outer wall cities because of her unique oddity, which only she possessed. Blink had no citizen code under her eye. Everyone who was a legal citizen of the outer wall colonies was required to get a code stamp under their left eye to identify them as GEOs. GEO was an acronym for Genetically Enhanced Operators, but over the years it had been shortened from GEO to simply GEOS. It was both a slur by humans who hated them and an accurate description of what they were.
Gasha,
interrupted Lenny.
is that why you have the picture under your eye? Are you a Geo?
GEO. Lenny, and yes, but you have to be patient. You can't interrupt the story.
Sorry, Gasha.
Now, where was I?
Blink! You were telling me about Blink.
Oh yes, Blink.
Said Gasha with a smile.
Blink navigated the streets along Market Alley at the southern wall, where Caleb Carr made the mistake that had brought about the conditions that existed along the perimeter of the great city wall. The memory of Caleb was slowly fading within the city and its perimeter, but the desperate souls who clung to life each day in the wastelands revered him as either a hero or a fool, depending on who you asked. It had been 35 long, hard years since Caleb rallied the wasteland citizens into an army and challenged the capital city. Some still remember the evening before that fateful battle when Caleb himself stood on a huge block of cement and spoke to a sea of starving men and women who were willing to risk death to gain access to the capital city's plentiful resources.
Brothers and sisters,
began Caleb as his voice resonated with determination and anger.
we are all that remains of humanity. Those who live in the comfort and decadence of the capital city have not just lost touch with what it means to be human, but they have forfeited the right to claim their part in humanity. Only animals would look at their own brethren and turn a blind eye to their suffering and hardship as they feast on the labor of others. They have made us their slaves by demanding that we provide their iron, their wood, their meat, and their fruit in exchange for scraps and poverty. It's not enough to simply walk away and go find refuge elsewhere. The capital city is the last bastion of breathable air, drinkable water, medication, research, and hope for our dying planet, and it is governed by greedy fools. The Council of Seven shares no part in our suffering and no concern for our pain. They bleed the few resources dry that remain for us to help rebuild our home while we do nothing. Why should the rich have the benefit of health and technology while those who are born to poverty must face sickness and death as we work to make their city stronger with our labor? Do we not deserve a chance to put the last resources we have to better use rather than die in the wastelands while the rich devour any chance of survival that we may still have?
They're the ones who created the weapons that destroyed our planet!
Yelled a voice from the crowd.
They are the politicians who chose to start the war that caused this suffering.
Yelled another. A mumble became a war cry as the crowd began to chant,
Our planet, a life, a weapon, a knife! Our planet, a life, a weapon, a knife!
The chant made it clear that either the Council of Seven could surrender back the planet's remaining resources hoarded within the walls of the capital city or face the weapons and knives of the resistance.
Today we gain access to the city that controls our lives, or we die at its gates. But we will not live another day without hope,
declared Caleb, and with that the army began its move toward the heavily fortified walls of the capital city. Within the walls, the Council of Seven met, unconcerned about Caleb's army. The wall was protected by the most advanced weaponry ever created, and only a fool would attempt to penetrate its concrete armor. Caleb was just such a fool. He had nothing to lose, and within his heart there was a sense of certainty that his life was worth sacrificing for even a chance that his people could have the resources they needed to live normal lives and begin rebuilding the destruction caused by the wealthy. As Caleb approached the wall with his makeshift army to his back, the wall's weapons system detected the attack and began firing, but Caleb had seen this day coming long before this moment and had a plan already in place. As a maintenance worker for the city, he oversaw constructing the powerhouses for the wall's defences, and occasionally he would be made to repair broken or worn parts within the structures that helped the power generators. Caleb had placed small charges in the generator housing that he set off just as the attack began. The wall went dark, and he used the few moments that he had created to reach the wall and place charges along its base. Caleb and his army managed to breach the southern wall of the city and create a precarious foothold within the heavily populated business centre. The council hesitated to attack to minimize the damage that would be caused to the area. By the time the council realized that they had no choice but to attack Caleb to stop his advance, he had spread along the outer inner city for miles, and the army had spread out, making it hard to target them as a group. The battle went on for months as the city threw resources into their attempt to surgically remove Caleb and his cohorts, but their hesitation in the first few hours of the battle had cost them a large portion of the southernmost city, and that loss was growing by the day. In an unfortunate twist of fate, the researchers from the Science and Development Centres arrived with news that they had unlocked the secret to an archaeological discovery that had long perplexed even their best minds. They had discovered what they described as a 350-year-old time capsule that contained a message from a long-past expert in DNA manipulation. This message explained that the female who created the message was not fully human, but her hope was to save humanity from itself. She stated that she foresaw humanity's demise and hoped that her gift would be discovered by the survivors of the next generation of humans to rise from the ashes. Her prediction was accurate, and humans had destroyed themselves, but the message was found several generations too early for what she believed would be a generation of humans who had lost everything and needed a beacon of hope. The last city to survive was still technologically advanced and used her gift that was designed to guide humans to a better tomorrow, and it would soon be turned into the deadliest weapon ever created by humans.
Gasha?
Interrupted Lenny once again.
Why were the people in the city so mean?
Unfortunately, Lenny, the people inside the wall were mostly oblivious to the misfortune of the people living outside of its borders. They just went about their day giving no thought to where the food and resources came from that made their lives more enjoyable. The Council of Seven controlled the media and would not allow people to see the real situation beyond the comfort of the wall.
But they were making poor people do all the work and not letting them in the city to have good food and medicine. No wonder Caleb was so mad. Did they get to live in the city, Gasha? Did Caleb get to bring all the people inside the city?
Well, you have to let me get to that, Lenny. You keep interrupting the story.
Sorry, Gasha. I won't interrupt you anymore.
Okay, let's get back to Caleb.
Gasha?
What, Lenny?
If everybody moved into the city, who would do all the work? Would there be enough room?
That was part of the problem, Lenny. There was not enough for everyone to live in luxury, so only some did. That is why Caleb was fighting to overtake the city. He didn't want to live there. He wanted to get the resources, medicine, and those who knew medicine to help everyone and share the remaining resources with everyone instead of just those who lived within the city. Now, what happened to the promise you made about not interrupting again?
Sorry, Gasha. I meant starting now.
Gasha looked at Lenny with an expression that said she had little expectation that she would not be interrupted again as she continued.
Now I lost track of where I was, Lenny.
The time capsule. Gasha, the bad people found a time capsule.
Oh yes, the time capsule. Within the time capsule, a blueprint describing how to create an advanced and highly intelligent human-like being was found. It was accompanied by several small devices to give a less advanced civilization a head start on creating the technology which would assist them in creating the plan described in the blueprint. To an advanced city and intelligent research teams, like those found in the city, it was as if the woman who would become known as the creator had given them a made-to-order end to their Caleb problem. The council decided to create an army of soldiers from the blueprint. They were faster, stronger, and healed faster than any human, and before long, the battle-weary army that Caleb led into the city was pushed out into the wastelands once again, along with those who chose to side with him from within the city. Hundreds of the city's citizens shared Caleb's vision for the future that included the best interest of the future rather than the comforts shared by the elite within the city walls. Families were cast out of the city with young children and babies and made to live in the pollution and hardship of the Great War's aftermath. Sickness quickly took the lives of many who had not gained a tolerance for the environment while living in the clean air of the city. What was once a united army quickly became a lawless society of desperate people with no hope. The newly created Geos were designated as the protectors of the city, but the Council of Seven feared their power and chose to create housing for them outside of the walls of the city. The blueprint was then altered to create less powerful versions of the pure Geos that were assigned jobs and split into work colonies. They worked day and night building the walls of the city higher and stronger. The weaponry was reinforced and the power to the weapons was moved within the walls and maintained by humans from that day forward. The pure Geos were designated as the peacekeepers for the camps and forced to enforce the laws created by the council on their brethren. The war was over, but the world was an even darker place now. The city, which was once a beacon of hope, had been reduced to a flicker.
Lenny looked as if she was going to burst as she raised her hand, waiting for Gasha to call on her to ask a question.
Lenny, just because you raise your hand, it doesn't mean you're not interrupting me again.
Sorry, Gasha, but I gotta know something.
Well, if you wait until I finish, you may find that I answered your question.
I know, but this is a special question, and I don't think it's in your story.
Gasha, knowing this story wouldn't be going anywhere until she got this out of Lenny's system, asked,
What is it, Lenny?
Were you one of the GOBs that was made to leave the city?
Geos, Lenny, and no. The Geos were protecting the city from Caleb and his army. There were only 50 pure Geos when Caleb was removed from the city, but the fighting continued into the wasteland for many more years until the rebels were pushed back far beyond the wall. After the Geos were made to live outside of the city, the blueprint was changed and my mother and father were created to work for the city. They were not warriors. They were workers. When I was born, the war had been over for some time, and I lived in one of the hundreds of shanties along the perimeter of the wall.
What's a shanties, Gasha?
It's a little house, but it had only the most basic necessities. We cooked on a wood fireplace and were given rations of food and water to live on.
Were there other kids your age to play with, Gasha?
Lenny, if you wait, I will tell you all about the city. You're going to make me lose my train of thought.
Sorry, Gasha. I won't make you lose your train anymore. I'll be quiet.
As Gasha hesitated to correct Lenny's misunderstanding about trains of thought, she decided to let it go and continue her story.
Many years had passed since Caleb was defeated, and the suffering of the people who lived in the wasteland became much worse. The term rebels was used by the Council of Seven to describe the desperate souls who were fighting to simply stay alive. Occasionally, the large screens that lined the city wall both inside and out would report that a group of rebels had attacked a water line or a food supply chain, but the attacks were exaggerated to stir fear in the city residents. GOs had been moved into colonies around the perimeter of the city, where they were separated into job designations. The maintenance colony handled the water lines that fed the city, any equipment that needed repair, and oversaw fuel collection and refinement. The farming colony grew the food, harvested it, packaged it, and made sure it was shipped into the city. The scavenger colony was sent into the wasteland to collect metal, plastic, glass, and just about anything that the city could use to build with. The military was spread across the colonies and split into 4 parts. The North, South, East, and West Wall commanders were all pure GOs and were in charge of the troops who were made up mostly of the GOs who were created from the altered blueprint. They were not as strong or as fast as the pure GOs, but they were still stronger than humans. At least until the humans began putting chemicals in the food shipped to the colonies.
Why did they put chemicals in the food?
Asked Lenny, and she suddenly put her hands over her mouth as she realized she was interrupting again. Gasha stopped and stared at Lenny before saying,
The Council of Seven created a sickness in the GOs by putting chemicals in their food. They did this so that they could offer the GOs a cure in the form of a vaccine. The vaccine cured the sickness but was very addictive and required weekly injections. When the GOs began to have problems injecting so many people every week, the city came up with a solution, which they had planned all along. They began putting the chemical to treat the breathing sickness they created into the food and ended the need for injections.
Gasha, why would they want to make the GOs sick?
Because by making them sick, they could offer them a drug to cure them, and the drug could only be gotten from the city. It made them slaves. They could not go more than a week without the drug that they believed was a cure, and this meant they needed the city as much as the city needed them. The council knew they would have the power to demand more from the GOs if they had no way to leave or fight back. After the drug was in the food, the GOs were helpless and at the mercy of the council.
I bet they were mad. Did they try to fight back?
The GOs believed the drug was the city's answer to the sickness. They didn't know the city had made the sickness that made them need the drug. The wall commanders remained loyal to the Council of Seven because they believed the city was really attempting to save humanity and the GOs.
But, Gasha, wouldn't somebody have told them that the leaders of the city were hurting them?
No one knew, Lenny. The only information the people got from within the city was given to the wall commanders, and they had no reason to question the humans they were built to protect. They would get whatever version of the story that the council gave to the commanders, and no one knew the truth about what was happening inside the wall, any more than the citizens inside knew what was happening outside the wall.
I have so many questions, Gasha.
Oh, so you don't want to hear about Blink?
Blink. I want to hear more about Blink.
So, should we continue the story that you interrupted again, little lady?
Yes. Tell me about Blink, Gasha.
Gasha smiled and put her finger on her lips to tell Lenny to stop interrupting the story. Gasha knew Lenny was never going to sit quietly at this point, so the best she could hope for was to buy a few more minutes uninterrupted.